I'm not going to take anything out because I'm going to be leaving.
Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon, folks. We are back to take up some additional committee discussion regarding H92, an act relating to Human Services Board fair hearing proceedings. Just as an FYI, we also have requested testimony from the Attorney General's office because it's the assistant AGs who generally represent departments at the Human Services Board. And so they are happy to testify, but they weren't able to be here this afternoon. So I believe that they're going to be here tomorrow. That will also represent steady answer. You'll be able to ask your question tomorrow. I have to attend another meeting briefly. So Representative Garofano is going to lead the discussion here and take it away, and I will be back.
Thanks.
Ready?
Can you join us? Sure. And yes, I do. See, I didn't want to disrupt everybody, but I appreciate it. Thank you, Katie. So we heard some testimony this morning from the agency with some recommendations that they had. They are offering to develop a report with recommendations around efficiencies and process improvement. Can I get someone to just shut the door? I'm sorry. And we started kind of going through the draft that you provided, acknowledging that it's a draft and kind of putting concepts out there. And it was before we heard from the agency. So I also want to spend some time kind of thinking about timelines, given that where we are in the during the session. Because the agency's recommendation was to submit a report by December 15th, but that would have to be a request that wouldn't be legislated because this didn't make the crossover deadline, so it won't get to the Senate until next year. So kind of need your help guiding us around how that would work or how we would request that. I mean, they're offering to do it, so and then we also, as the chair mentioned, we're going to hear from the AGs. We also heard from the parent representation group, Larry Chris organization.
Oh, right.
They might have some feedback and some recommendations, and he's going to submit written testimony probably this evening or tomorrow. So as far as kind of going through and discussing further revisions or concepts, I'll open it up to committee. Does it make sense for Katie to kind of go through the sections as I was kind of reading carefully? I haven't had time to carefully even read this draft, but I noticed that there is a report in the first section. So instead of adding the report in the later section, maybe we can update what's in the existing report that they have. And this morning when we were going through the draft, we did go back and pull up the report that they submit every year anyway. And although we haven't looked at it closely, we did acknowledge that they already have a report that they develop and submit. And maybe we can think through how we can improve that report and what do we want in that report that would help us improve the process, and what data would we use in future years. Go ahead, Doug.
Would there be sort of it seems like we have two things going here. One is the annual report for data. What we're talking about with respect to process improvement almost seems like it'd be a one-time report. So would we want to address those as separate components?
They are addressed differently in this draft, as you've noticed.
Yeah.
It's more than one time, though. It's ongoing. It could be a one-time report. What I was really thinking about as you were speaking was that the audience is different for each of them. One comes to the General Assembly to inform your policymaking. The other goes to the agencies and departments to inform their systems improvement. So I don't know
So
how
I
you
think
want.
that the report that we added,
Mhm.
as part of kind of the new legislation, I think that for me is more in line with what the agency is recommending to develop on their own. That's what they brought forth this morning,
Mhm.
that they would kind of bring the stakeholders together and submit a report that has recommendations on gaps, trends, patterns, feedback loop, training, and like all the things kind of we talked about, but they would collaborate with the stakeholders and bring something forth for us to consider to maybe develop further legislation on.
Is it your and their understanding that that would be a one-time?
Yes.
It would be one time.
And then we would also want to build in the bill, some kind of regular process improvement.
I see, okay. So for that piece, as you said, the timing doesn't really work. So you have, I mean, you could do nothing and just have a conversation with them and they're going to submit something to you. You can formalize that by writing a letter and sort of outlining your expectations and the due date and having a formal letter in place. Then the third option is looking for a vehicle that's moving and sort of plunking a paragraph and if it's germane.
Given that the agency has offered to do this, I think a letter makes sense, just kind of for us to outline what we're what we're looking for them to include in that report and what to consider.
Okay.
I think that makes sense.
Do you wanna, I can do that. Do you wanna give me a bit more information? So it would go to the Human Services Board and would they be collaborating with the agency?
So the agency offered to lead it.
Oh, the agency is gonna lead it. So the letter would be to the agency.
Yeah.
Okay. And they would work in collaboration.
With the Human Services Board.
Uh-huh.
And then departments. And then we talked about kind of stakeholders. I don't know if we want to name them, but it would be like Vermont Legal Aid and the advocates that work to support the various parties that go to the Human Services Board, but I don't know how.
Okay. I could say something, advocates appearing before.
Or advocacy groups that
Advocates.
appear before, so it's not individuals, but
Groups. Um,
The Attorney General's office.
right, needs the attorney general.
okay. Okay, and when do you want a report back by? You said
So
December.
they said December 15. They could
December
do that.
15. So to this committee, and I'm assuming Senate Health and Welfare. And then what exactly do you want in the report? I have the general sense that it's sort of like a system evaluation for improvement. Do you like what is on page 9 of the draft, or seems like maybe the idea has evolved more since I've last been here?
Generally, what they said is the report would kind of review the current process and offer recommendations for improvements. But I do think that we need to be a little bit more detailed and specific. So outlining the process for each department, because they're dealing with, I think, at least three different departments that go before the board. Identifying administrative efficiencies and doing some process mapping.
I like your lines 20 and 21, and then down on 3 and 4, on pages 8 and 9, that might be some language to capture
Yeah, improving outcomes and accountability.
challenges and trends for the
Trends.
purpose of an increment. And then the other one, provide recommendations on strategic performance improvement and professional development opportunities. Those seem to be
We
good
have,
things to grasp.
we haven't, I'm just kind of scrolling through the bill. I'm sorry, I haven't given it a careful reading. The plain language aspect and the accessibility, if you will, more generally use of that term for petitioners and how they interact with the processes or components of that would be appropriate for this report.
So I think that kind of is a bit of a bigger conversation because that I think has two pieces. There's one piece in before December, like as soon as possible, can they update their current guidance documentation to make it more accessible and more using plain language? That's one conversation. And then second, I think would be part of the report, or what I envision as part of the report, is coming to us with recommendations on what would it take to kind of do a bigger overhaul, to maybe utilizing some of the things that Anne found with, like, a video or, some infographics that help explain the process of what it's like to go before the Human Services Board and having that hearing. So I do think it's separate, but again, timing wise, maybe in the letter, we can ask them, can they improve upon what exists today to make it more accessible, like before December, before the next session, ideally.
To bring you in on that aspect, Katie, because I don't think you were here earlier, that the idea came up about small claims, how does small claims handled, because it's a bunch of pro se litigants, and took a look, and there was like a short sort of explainer video. So we're talking
okay.
about a video.
That was embedded in what on its own is just a really nice explainer, written text and pictures, and then you can link to a video for each of the pieces as well.
That might come out to you.
I think I'm good. I'll just say something about identifying improvements that can be made in the short term to make the information sent to appellants user-friendly and accessible, and using any media or graphics necessary to achieve that end, something like that. Does that work?
Yeah, and that I think, again, I think one piece is in the letter in just kind of a formal request, and then in the bill as part of the process improvement, just making sure that they kind of are acknowledging that they're going to continue including that piece of it, is that they don't just do that once, because it's going to have to be part of their continuous quality improvement efforts.
Yeah, were you meaning what you said before, like right away, take what they already have and
To make it more
better.
simple, because
But
that's not going to be like a video, or because I
That's a
don't think,
separate process from doing a really enhanced version, which would be, that would be in the report about what they could do about that.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, right away, they should be able to upgrade the
At least,
current
yeah, I mean,
document.
just make it a little bit more user friendly with
Yeah.
what they have already.
Yeah.
The other things for the report to include that I noted,
Sorry, for the letter, or for the bill?
this is for the letter because it's the report.
Okay.
So we said outlining the process and then taking some of the language from page 8 and 9, and then outlining the fiduciary responsibilities for each department, because they were talking about the different levels of like funding and how the funding requirements could have an impact on the process.
Okay.
And then data. We want in the report, in the letter, for them to include in the report, recommendations on how they can collect uniform data across all departments, and recommendations on how that data is gathered and possibly analyzed. Anything else for the letter, not the bill right now? This is for the letter that will produce the report that will have kind of the main aspects of this kind of modernizing and improving the current system.
Just to ask, do we need to make it clear to the agency? It seems like, excuse me, it seems like the report here that we're looking at assumes, although I'm not really sure, that from the moment someone makes a request for a hearing, they're somehow represented in this report. I'm not sure the agency would see it that way or think of it that way. So we just want to make sure that we're starting from that point as the beginning, the start point, not which cases get referred to the Human Services Board.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I totally, I'll try it again.
Well, if there's a process, I want to enter, I want to seek a fair hearing, there's a
Mhm.
process for me to do that. As soon as I enter that, it's from that point that we want this data, I think, to be marked, not from the point where the Human Services Board gets a number of folks
okay.
that you see.
So like the recommendations are at the point of first contact.
I think so.
Especially around data.
Okay.
Because they've referenced to us that there's an informal resolution to quite a few
Yeah.
cases before they get to a hearing officer or the full board.
You know, it seems like we might want to learn. And it seems to me that it's in that process, that space, from the entry space to the pre-hearing
Mhm.
resolution, that there's possibility for some adjustment in the system that might make it actually more meaningful for people to be engaged
Mhm.
and might reduce the number, might potentially reduce the
The
number.
volume.
Of cases that
And also
Service
that's
board
where
has
they
to hear.
can find some best practices,
Yeah.
some
yeah,
gaps in the various departments. This morning Ashley mentioned like certain departments have a whole appeals department that, help appellants before they get to the Human Services Board. But again, if that's something that should be modeled and expanded across departments, that's before it's gotten to the Human Services Board. It's at the agency level and the department level.
I would say one more thing too, if I may, that seems to me that if we're thinking about efficiencies and trying to perhaps lower the caseload, that I may be wrong in what I've heard, but it seems to me that there are several instances where the same finding is discovered by the Human Services Board repeatedly. And so it seems like that could have been managed in a different way earlier on, rather than all these individual hearings coming. That takes a lot of time and energy. So that's why the
that's-
data would somehow fit together, the data study analysis as you're talking about.
Any
I hope.
agency or department specific patterns observed by the board. So when they're seeing patterns in the cases, right, that's what we're,
It seems,
that seems to be, I was just like, this was in the, on page 9, it was element number 5 for the annual report, so I don't,
Yes.
I'm just looking at that as language, not where.
that's great. Well, it was what that makes me think is, since we're sending this letter to the agency, it's sort of asking the agency to develop a little bit of oversight about that construct and not leave it just to the Human Services Board to tell us about repetitions, for instance, in this particular case. But the agency starts to see these
Patterns.
and trends, and maybe there's some system changes that could happen at that point, as they're thinking in terms of this next other piece, which is the convening part of getting everyone together. Yeah.
One other thing maybe to include in the letter, and I'm happy to put this in the committee for get thoughts, is one thing that we've talked a lot about, which we haven't really, I don't think, addressed, is how does the appellant get their story heard? Where it doesn't harm the case and protects kind of the legal construct around this quasi judicial system or process. So that's something that we heard a lot of testimony for and against, but again, I don't think we've landed anywhere where like it would make it possible for an appellant to share what they need to.
You can't at that level, but it doesn't mean that they can't at one of their lower levels.
And that's what I
In the
wonder
department,
if
yeah.
we want to make sure that's included in the report, that they
Right.
consider that as when they bring all the stakeholders together, that they bring us something back to act on.
Is it akin to really stretching my legal knowledge and background here, akin to an opening or closing statement where I think there's some latitude given to an attorney in an opening statement. There isn't evidence introduced per se through an opening statement.
Yeah, but doing that with the hearing, I mean, that actually could be, somebody could go on for a long, long time. You know what an opening statement is, yes, but I was thinking pre that when they're having one of the internal, whatever it was called, before it goes, where they often are able to resolve it. That if they look about making sure that in that context, a person can really share everything. Now, there is a downside to that because they're meeting with the other side, in the sense they're meeting with the department that denied them something. So, you know, if they don't have anybody guiding them, it's quite possible that in telling their whole story, they actually give the department a lot of evidence of why the denial was valid. But that's the only place I can think of where somebody could really share all of the reasons they think they were wronged, which is what it's about.
Yeah, I guess I'm envisioning a challenge of accomplishing that goal, and maybe we get to it by having the appellants better understand the process, than the formal process. And through that better understanding, they can convey what they want to convey.
Yeah, right.
I
Going
think at
back to
the-
like that the small claims court thing where it's really explicit about this is when you do this kind of thing. And
But I think at the very least, I personally would like to see that considered by this convening of stakeholders that is coming together to put together
Yeah.
this process
say
improvement.
how and where
Right.
can that happen?
And if it can't happen, tell us why from both perspectives, right?
Mhm.
Like, I want to hear from that they looked at it, they considered it from all perspectives. And if it can't happen, how do they hope to address it by, kind of building out some other things around this process that will help the appellant feel like they understand the process and can have a way of sharing their story.
I think part of that, that understanding, whatever we called it, that we're talking about for training kind of thing. Part of that is understanding this, maybe counterintuitive to lawyers. Reality is that what tends to be most important to somebody in this situation is not whether they win or lose. It's whether they feel they were fairly
I
treated.
think that's really the point.
And that's what's critical. And that's what's not happening.
You know, so how can
And
we,
people are always going to be disappointed if they lose, but if they felt it was really fair, it's a very different.
So anything else to include in the letter that will basically produce a process improvement plan? That's what I think this letter will produce by December 15th. Go ahead.
Back up to the point we were just discussing about whether there's thoughts on how there can be an opportunity created to express themselves. Is that really part of the letter and we want just the department to chime in, or is this really more from page 8, section or subsection J, line 18? These, what's noted here is quarterly, but probably biannually or annual meetings. Seems like out of that process may have the best opportunity for the right voices and all voices to try to puzzle out the way for petitioners to be heard.
The letter is requesting all the
That group.
stakeholders. It's the same group of people so between now and December, all the stakeholders so the agency will not produce this letter kind of,
Single-handed.
single-handedly.
They're going to be gathering that input. Yeah.
With all the stakeholders to consider all of our requests.
I'm just curious to see how this all hashes out once.
Yeah.
Because I think we're basically asking to do what's in the bill without.
Yes.
without
But
making
they
a bill.
It's not
But
in
they
the bill
offered
and
to
we
do
can
that.
we'll get it.
Yeah, and I think
faster.
what's important is that they offered
Yeah.
Yes.
to come up with a process improvement plan.
They did.
So we're just kind of saying, these are the things that we'd like you to consider, because that's where we've heard from testimony that some of the pain points are.
Yeah, the only thing is tricking me a little bit here is the idea that what we will ultimately want is it's one thing to name all this and then to pull people together and pull a plan together, but then it's the implementation. And I suppose that would be next year.
Next year.
Mhm.
We would create a bill that
Yeah.
would produce the a little bit like what we've done with H91.
Yeah, and I think
Depending on what they recommend.
Yes,
for
exactly.
that.
then the things that will be left in the bill would be the convening of we decided maybe semi-annual of the same stakeholder group, not quarterly.
Okay.
So we can put that in the bill that, starting whenever, maybe January 1st of 26. Actually, no, it would be,
Do you want to set a date? You could leave it up to them to set, if you're saying
Oh, yes.
semi-annually, it's not like you need
Yeah.
to report
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
we don't need to report back and they can set it. And then the other thing in here. Is a training,
Mhm.
for the, attorneys and the hearing officers.
So I should strike subsection K. Okay. And then what about subsection B
Tell me what page that's
on
on.
page 4? This is the plain language summary. Do you want to hold
Oh,
on
I
that?
see that, yeah.
I think we do need to hold on that because I think, what we're asking them to do in the letter is two things. What can you do now?
Yep.
And then can you come back with us with a plan of improving the process for just, not just plain language, but really better understanding? And I don't know, like a more human-centered design
Right.
of the process, delivering the communication.
So strike this B1. And then what do we have in B2?
And then, sorry.
Oh, this, the legal issue. Do you want that language at the bottom of page 4? Including the requirement to identify the legal issue that the board or hearing officer is anticipated to decide at the hearing.
Well, that probably makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's keep that.
process adjustment.
I just feel like it's also worth flagging, since I sort of made a unilateral decision, that the terminology for how we refer to the aggrieved person, there are about 5 different language choices throughout. So I chose one, but maybe it's not the right one. So I want to flag that everywhere you see appellant is the fact that I made a choice to change everything to be standardized, but
And we
maybe
can
that's
check
not
with
your
the,
choice.
with the board and the agency.
Okay.
If there's a correct one, and the AG will be here tomorrow, I think.
Okay,
They can
great.
provide feedback on that. The other thing that, we want on page 3, line 10 through 14. We wanted to make sure that we're not listing the programs, we're just listing the departments. Because programs can change.
And some are left out because they're
Yeah,
new.
so it
There's
has
not
like
even the old
the,
language.
WIC and.
So, well, maybe I need to understand what you're thinking a little bit better. I think what this is saying that all programs under DCF and DIVA and DALE and mental health can appeal, but with regard to the Department of Health, only WIC applicants can appeal.
But there's substance use programs also.
That would be excluded under my reading of this.
Right, so we're not sure if that,
So is there, can we check to see if if this is accurate
right.
right now? So we did ask Aegis to review this, so I can follow up with Ashley.
Okay,
Yeah, they're supposed to come back on
Yeah.
that
okay,
for us. Yeah.
So that's just for you to flag that might need updating
okay, great.
based on what they say, because if there's other programs that are not here right now, we
Mhm.
want to make sure that we either add them or be more high level.
Okay.
So it would capture future programs that might be included.
Sure.
So we'd have to change it.
Yep.
Remember to change it, which we wouldn't.
Okay. A question regarding the letter and the bill. Do we want to hear back from the department once they, or the agency, once they receive this letter? Because I think we've kind of expanded the scope in a way, just, so we can learn from them. Okay, we appreciate your offer. Here's what we're envisioning. Can you report back to us by May 1st, whether you, have any concerns or points in here that would be challenging to complete by December 15th, rather than getting to December 15th and them saying, well, we could do 1, 2, and 3, but 4 and 5 were.
So the way I look at that, and I'm open to hear thoughts, is that had we made the crossover deadline, that we would have had a bill that mandated them to do the things that we're saying in the letter.
Yeah.
So the fact that they have offered, and from Joe in the room and the agency, they've been very collaborative and want, I've gotten the feeling that they're very eager to improve their processes. So I think putting some of these structures around what we're looking for them to kind of evaluate makes sense.
But are we still trying to move H92 through the House?
I was gonna mention that. I was
So
gonna
if we're
throw that
gonna
in
be-
because
If we're sending it out of our body, do we want to know what we want to have in it? If there are concerns that the agency has about what we've asked for by December 15th, that we then want to ensure are in fact in the bill.
well, the
Well, they're
letter,
not gonna be in the bill. So the pieces from the letter, what comes back from the letter will be in future legislation. We will take that up next year. So whatever recommendations they give us by December 15th, we're not gonna be able to act on,
Right.
obviously, until next year. So what we would put in H92, passing out of the House, sending it to the Senate, would be things that don't have to do with the big structural change of this whole systemic improvement. It would just be the training and, what did I say?
yeah, so I'm,
The convening, like requiring them to convene a stakeholder group for continuous quality improvement and the training. Those are the two things that I think.
so, yeah, so I'm wondering about whether that makes sense to do because they're gonna they're gonna gather that group, in the fall. And so this would take effect in terms of further meetings like, spring next year. This bill is gonna be sitting in the Senate. And then we would be working on another bill, which we would end up, the Senate bill won't
Yeah.
pass. We'll end up merging them. I wonder why we really need a bill
Bill
now
this,
as
yeah.
opposed
Just
to
wondering that.
putting it all together next
And-
year and sending it complete to the
To the
Senate. Because it's not as if we're gonna be able to pass this to lock some things in.
Yeah.
It's gonna sit on the Senate wall till next January.
Yeah,
One reason may be that we have the time and attention now on it, and we have no idea what will come up when we are back in session
You're
next
exactly
January.
right. That is a really good reason in terms of the reality of if there isn't something.
yeah.
And because we might even, if things are crushed and there's some good ideas, ask the Senate, look, can you can add this to the bill instead of having another thing moving that hasn't even left the House.
Yeah,
Yes, your thinking is right on.
I also support the idea of a check-in from them simply because it will help us understand whether or not we're even on the same, whether we're getting towards something that makes sense. And if we wait till next December to find out, that's not quite what we thought, then we have to kind of start all over.
You may want a check-in date that's as soon as possible
Yes.
because you need a vehicle that is moving if you get an unfavorable answer and you decide you want legislation to
Yeah.
move it instead of a letter. I keep looking at S36. It deals with Medicaid, which is one of the programs.
So, no, you're right. But we can just ask informally. We've been having
Mhm.
dialogue with the department.
I'm happy. to
Here's the
check in
draft
with it,
letter.
Yeah.
Are any of these things like totally irrational? There's no way,
We
that's
can
not
do
what
it,
you
yeah.
meant when you said you could work on something.
I think,
We
just
can do that, yeah,
that would be enough to make whether we're on the right track or not. I mean,
exactly.
they could, her offer was what her offer was this morning. I don't think it was probably, if we'd have had a conversation, I think we would know right now whether or not these things are
Yes.
reasonable.
Yeah.
But we don't know that because we've added a whole lot of things on that seem reasonable to us, but it may not be
The thing
reasonable for them.
She said that I wrote, which we have kind of communicated to Katie, is outlining the process for each department. She
Good.
said that. identifying administrative efficiencies and process mapping. She didn't say the process mapping part. Those were my words. And outlining the fiduciary responsibilities and data. Like those are the kind of the big picture things we talked with Ashley about this morning. So I don't think we're off as far as asking for anything
Good.
that's really unreasonable, but I support us-
Running it by-
Yeah,
yeah,
running it
yeah.
by them, and saying like, is this achievable by this, is this what you meant? And can you do this by December 15th?
And are you suggesting, do I hear you suggest, again, I don't understand the process. Are you suggesting that depending on what their answer is, we might want to find something that's moving to attach some bill to or some language to?
I mean, having a piece of legislation that has passed that is directing that these are the tasks that have to be done is stronger and enforceable, where a letter is,
Yeah,
please give us this, thank you. So it's stronger. If everybody's in agreement,
Right,
don't
then-
need-
but
yeah.
the Senate also has to be in agreement.
yes, well, there's that.
So that, yeah, and yeah, well, there's still a little bit of time, but
So are there any other thoughts on what we should include in the letter, or should we have Katie draft the letter? And then I think it's the chair's discretion on whether or not we hold off on an actual bill. But I do think I would veer towards having a bill
I would too.
on a wall. Maybe it's limited
Yep.
in scope right now because we don't have all the information, but then we can work with our Senate colleagues to
It can be
either
added to.
added to.
They can
or we
send it back to
have
us and we can add it.
Yeah,
But yeah.
so that's what would be my recommendation. So we've covered the letter. We've covered the changes in the draft. Anything else? My God, if that's done, I feel really good.
it's good. We're gonna hear from the.
We're gonna hear from the AG tomorrow,
AG.
and we are going to get something from Larry Chris
Oh,
and
right.
parent representation. And he communicated they've been thinking about this for a long time, and in some of the cases that they support and represent at the fair hearing. Human Services Board, I think they have some ideas and thoughts that we can maybe incorporate.
The title of it is a fair hearing.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you need anything else from us, Katie?
No, I'm good. We'll see what
That's more than enough.
happens.
Oh, well, I guess timeline when.
When will I have a letter?
Yeah, so we can.
I think I'm scheduled to be back here tomorrow. Let me just check my calendar.
You ever sleep?
Usually. Let's see. Oh, I guess I'll have it by tomorrow afternoon. That should be possible.